Hello, dear listener. It's me, Reverend Eric, and I want to invite you to join the Arnemancy Discord server. Our new Discord community is the perfect place to connect with fellow listeners who share your passion for magic, tarot, and the occult. Engage in thought-provoking discussions, share your insights, and learn from each other in a welcome, supportive environment. But that's not all. Ever wanted to chat with some of your favorite podcast guests? You might just get the chance. Many of them pop into our Discord from time to time to share their wisdom and answer your burning questions. In addition, we have some special channels just for Patreon supporters to chat and share their thoughts. Sound fun? Check out the Arnemancy Discord server by visiting arnemancy.com/discord. That's arnemancy.com/discord. Or click the link in the show notes. See you there.
Speak the charm of make, charm of make, charm of make, charm.
There will come a time on the planet Earth when science and technology will be long forgotten. When wizards will rule the world.
This is the Arnemancy Podcast. Join your host, Reverend Eric, and his diverse array of amazing guests in an exploration of tarot, magic, the occult, and the history of Western esotericism. The Arnemancy Podcast exists thanks to the support of generous listeners like you. Please consider supporting this podcast for as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/arnemancy. Hello, listeners. Welcome back to the show. I am here today with Sara Mastros, who is the author of The Big Book of Magical Incense, the Orphic Hymns Grimoire, and the Sorcery of Solomon. And it's that last book, the Sorcery of Solomon, that I'm really excited to talk to you about. Sara, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
How is everything on your side of the world?
Well, honestly, I'm in the very last phases of my next project, which is a translation of a Hebrew manuscript of Pentacles. And this last phase of a book is my least favorite part of my job. I remind myself that this is the part I get paid for, but I've been editing encrypted Hebrew pentacles 8 hours a day for the last week, and so that's how my week is going.
I think that sounds fascinating.
It's fascinating for the first 4 hours, and then the next 30 hours are just like any other kind of very careful. Once upon a time, I was a research mathematician, and I used to do fancy theoretical mathematics 16 hours a day, and this is very similar to that, and I quit that job.
Okay, hold on. Let's back up a second. Research mathematician? Are you serious?
Yeah. So I went to graduate school in mathematics, in analytic topology, which is like a kind of fancy geometry, basically.
Oh, I know about analytic topology. That's
exciting.
I don't know enough about it.
Why do you know
why
about it?
Why do I know about it? Well, I guess because
that's not a thing normal people know about.
That's true. No, I agree with you. I love math.
Me too.
I never managed to get myself a college degree. I have dabbled in a zillion different things, but when I was in college, I did a lot of math and physics. And I've read some fun stuff about topology and analytic topology, but I've never really gotten into the weeds on it. So
I'll tell you, it becomes less and less fun the further into the weeds. Nobody but me had to actually be doing theoretical mathematics 18 hours a day to find out it wasn't fun.
Yeah. Well, I think the thing that I loved about topology just in general as a field was sort of the thing the question of how many holes does something have?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I'm going to take 2 minutes and explain to the audience what the fuck we're talking about.
Okay, yeah, please.
Topology is a branch of math. I'm going to talk about it in two different ways. I'm going to talk about it broadly, and then I'm going to talk about the kind I do, which is a little bit different than what I'm about to describe.
Okay.
Right? So topology, in essence, you can think of it as the study of what characteristics of I'm just going to say a shape, right? So imagine shapes in 3D, but I actually do them in more than 3D. But a shape, as you stretch and swoosh and bend it, but you're not allowed to tear it. So you're not allowed to make new holes. You're not allowed to cover up holes that are already there. And what properties of it remain the same. So if you start out with a donut, you could like put a dent in it, and you could get to like a coffee mug that had a handle, right? You could make that out of that Play-Doh without making new holes, right? And so some properties of that shape stay the same and others change as you deformate it. And that's broadly what topology is. But the kind I do is like so much weirder and more nonsensical than that. So what I did is called non-metrizable topologies. And actually, I didn't even do...
Wait. Oh, yeah. Hold on. Yeah. Metrizable. What the heck is metrizable?
So I'm about to explain, right? So metrizable means you can put a metric on it. That means that, like, there's a way to measure distance. So a lot of times you'll hear somebody say, like, oh, the laws of physics break down near a black hole. But really what's happening is essentially the laws of calculus break down. And the reason is because there's really no way to measure distance. Because in order to measure
space-time is metrizable?
Yeah. Well, yes. Normal... Whoa, that is such a complicated question that is close to my specialty. We act as though space-time is metrizable, and in most places it is, but once you're inside the event horizon of a black hole, it gets a little weird. So
pseudo-metrizable?
In order for something to be metrizable, this is such a nerd conversation that is not even what we're supposed to be nerding about.
No, it's cool. I warn my listeners all the time that I want to talk about like math with occult nerds. So this is kind of like my dream conversation.
Same, and I never get to do this in podcasts, so I'm excited. But I promise you guys in the audience that we are not going to talk about this the whole time. We will eventually.
Yeah, after this, it's going to be all circles.
So I could get so nerdy about it. Like my introduction to witchcraft class, the circles lesson is really like half geometry.
Oh God.
No, they love it. I'm good at it.
No, I feel like I want to take that class now. I should probably.
New semester starts at Halloween. www.witchlessons.com.
Okay, well let's talk about that as soon as we finish crossing the event horizon.
So in order to measure a distance, you really need three things to be true. You need the distance. Let me think about how to say this as simply as I can. Okay. You need a way to measure distance. Okay. How far is it from your house to the grocery store?
Oh, it gets further every day.
Right? And okay, so that was not the answer I wanted. I was hoping for an answer like 15 minutes. And then I would be like, you can see.
I can tell you 15 minutes on foot, like 1 mile. It's like 1 mile. So 20 minutes.
He gave a time, which is not really technically a measure of distance, right? And then he gave like a 1 mile. But that's, and there's a difference between like, if we're talking about like as the crow flies. I'm making all these hand gestures, but I suddenly realized that we're on the radio, and that is not helping the people listening to me at all. So in order to measure a distance, you need some things to be true. If the distance between two places are 0, you need them to be the same place. Mm-hmm. Right? That's like one of the rules of distance.
Feels true.
Sensible, right? Like it's terrible. Yeah. Like spaces where that isn't true are fucking terrible. Spoiler, spaces where these terrible things are true, that's my specialty. Like where they're not true. So the other thing you need is you need the distance from A to B to be the same as the distance from B to A. But I'll tell you, like where I live in Pittsburgh, that's like not true. Like sometimes with one-way streets, it's like much easier to get from here to there than it is to get from there to here.
Oh, right? Yeah.
So, like,
I live in lots of small towns in Oregon are the same way, yeah.
Right, and so, like, we have some sense of what it means for that to not be... And that's the situation of black hole. Like, it's real easy to get in, and it's real hard to get back out. Right? Yeah, and then the third thing is something called the triangle inequality, which I'm going to say it technical, and then I'll explain a little bit. It means that the distance from A to B plus the distance from B to C can't be shorter than the distance from A to C. Right? And another way to say that is that the shortest distance between 2 points has to be a straight line. And if that's not true, then you're fucked.
Well, especially if the universe isn't flat.
Yeah, well, you can get a little fancy with what straight line means. Like I gave that technical definition, and as I make it in English, it gets worse. But yeah, if and you'd think like it's hard to even imagine spaces where those three things wouldn't be true. But like that's the kind of math I did, is like, if those things aren't true, what can we do? Because we can't do fancy. Like, we can't do calculus anymore. Calculus really relies on distances that work. But, like, what math can you do if you can't measure distances? But you can say whether or not things are nearby, like, in the same neighborhood as somewhere else.
Right.
And that's really a pseudo or a non-metrizable technique.
I mean, you could say that as long as both things are on the same side of the event horizon, right? Like as soon as you cross.
Sadly, like not. We don't know. We don't know. We don't know. We're not really super confident what happens once you're like inside. And it depends what you mean by nearby. Maybe there's a problem where everything inside that event horizon is kind of in the same place, but the distances aren't zero. It's like terrible.
Well, let's dive into. I love that kind of stuff. I wish that I could just sort of branch off and start like a parallel universe podcast where that's what we talk about. But
I mean, I'll come on that podcast too. So like...
I know. We just have to get into the occult stuff. Like I know that there's at least one listener out there who's delighted to hear that there's a place where calculus doesn't work anymore. But for us existing in the Hawking's radiation of whatever the heck we're doing. I feel like people, at least in the occult circles that I dance around in, I think that people became aware of you mostly through your Orphic Hymns Grimoire, which I read and I really loved. But it was
Thank you. I'm glad you liked it.
Yeah, I thought it was great. But the Sorcery of Solomon book is the one that like really caught my attention. Like I thought that the way you approached it and the stuff that you got into, and like especially with your background and stuff, which we'll talk about in a second, it just made that book just kind of like really glow. Like it really felt like something that, worked with you and that you worked with it well. And I have
part
questions.
Of it is, it took me a couple books to kind of like understand what making a book is. So I feel like
I can understand that.
And also I will say like, so Orphic Hymns Grimoire is the first book I put out, but also the third book I put out, because it comes in 2 editions. So first, Andrew, actually, our mutual friend, Andrew Watt, I don't even remember how, we were talking about Orphic hymns. And I was reading one of them, and we were looking at the Thomas Taylor translations. And sometimes you would read them, and like I love them. They're beautiful. Like this is not a complaint about the Taylor, who is like a really cool dude, by the way, and people should look him up. Like
yeah,
he's
no shit. I mean,
super. I really want somebody to like make me a mini-series biography of him. I would watch that Netflix show.
The thing that always baffles me is like how long ago he was. Like
that book.
He was like he died in like the beginning of the 1700s or something like that. Like he was so long ago.
I think. The Taylor translation of the Orphic Hymns, I'm pretty sure it came out in 1790. I'm going to say 98.
Yeah.
You'd think I would know, and years ago when I was doing a lot of interviews about Orphic Hymns, I knew that dance. He's long enough ago that, like, I was reading these translations, and sometimes I'd be reading them like, that doesn't seem like something somebody in ancient Greece would have said. That, like, definitely feels like something somebody in, again, I contend, late 1700s England would have said. And then I would go back to the Greek and look, and I'd be like, oh, that's really not what that Greek says. So I just started translating them for me. Like, I think the very first one I translated was Selene, which I translated for a ritual at my local pagan pride day, which ended up getting canceled. Like that. Ritual. So I never did. It was fine. And I put it on Facebook, and people really liked it. So I did a couple more, and people really liked it. And I was like, do you like them enough to give me money for this? And then I ran a Kickstarter, and they did, which was shocking to me, because I made that Kickstarter, like, real talk, I was high. It was like 2 o'clock in the morning. I was like, let me throw this together. And I just did. Like there was not much. If people, like, Google searching, I'm sure you can still find it. Like, they will see it as, like, not good. So I did all the translations. My friend Brian Charles did illustrations for some of them. And, like, we put that out as a Kickstarter. It was great. But, there were problems with it. In particular, here's what I learned from self-publishing. I like to have a publisher. Really, all the things that happen between finished manuscript and a book showing up in somebody's house, I want to not do them. Like, it turns out there's, like, a lot of things that happen in between there that really were not obvious to me until I had to do them myself. And stupidly, I've done that to myself again. I'm in the final stages of another Kickstarter. So I did Orphic Hymns Grimoire, and that got me a contract with Wiser. And I did something which is dumb. So for people who aren't about, like, I wrote what I thought people wanted, which was like the most beginner-ish book I could imagine, which is, first of all, I mean, it's a very beginner accessible book. I try very hard to make, I think, all of my books, even like the quite technical ones, like Sorcery of Solomon, they are indeed accessible to beginners, like nerdy beginners, right?
You are a teacher, right? Like professionally.
I was a math, like, after I quit math grad school, I had a conversation one day. My last couple years in grad school, I was teaching for the philosophy department because, weirdly, they paid more. So I was teaching logic for the philosophy department.
Oh, well, that's why they paid more. I mean, there's...
Well, the University of Pittsburgh has, like, a world-class philosophy department that is, like, rolling in cash, is really the situation. So they paid more than the math department did. So I was teaching for them, and I was talking to my teaching supervisor, who was a great philosopher, now dead, named Mickey Perloff. And I was saying, like, you know, academia is actually hot fucking garbage, which anybody with experience in academia knows that. It didn't used to be. Like, 30 years ago, that was not true, but 40 years ago. But now, like, academia is not a job, and I encourage people listening to this to not even, young people, academia is not a real career anymore. Like, they have completely gutted it, and it's terrible.
Oh, it's true.
Like, my professor friends make less than minimum wage. Almost.
Yeah, I've heard that from so many people in academia.
It's a terrible, like, it's a disaster waiting to happen. Anyway, I was like, all I ever wanted to be was like a natural philosopher, like Newton or Plato. And he was like, you know what those people did for a living, Sarah? They just taught rich kids. And I was like, oh,
yeah, they were rich,
teaching.
And they were rich kids.
Yeah, like teaching.
I mean, maybe not Newton, but yeah.
Oh no, Newton was definitely a rich kid. Like, I loved teaching. Like, that was I did not. I mean, I like math, but like any job, you know, academia comes with a lot of bullshit. And I hated every single part of that bullshit. Like, but the teaching part I loved, right? And so that night I went home and started sending out resumes to like rich kid private schools. And I got a job. And so I taught in private school. I taught mathematics for a long time. Eventually my last couple years teaching, I ran a school for the gifted, which was fun, but also turned out had a lot of bullshit that wasn't. You see, teaching in high school also had a lot of bullshit that wasn't teaching, and yada. I quit that job too to do what I do now, which I like to imagine is a feckless degenerate with no real job, where I do magic and write about magic and teach magic, and all the bullshit I had to do in academia and in high school that wasn't actually teaching, but like you know, grading. No, I just don't do any of it. I don't have to grade. Yeah. I don't have to deal with parents. You see, the thing about teaching high school is that the students are not there consensually. Like, they are being forced to be there by the full violent power of the state. And here's a pro tip to high school teachers. It goes a long way if you simply acknowledge that fact. Like, hey guys, I know you don't want to be here. I actually am also being compelled to be here by capitalism. So let's just be you and me against the man instead of you versus me, right? But now, now I only teach people who want to learn, and that is a delight.
Well, I want to hear then about you mentioned, I think right when we started talking, you've got some classes starting on October 31st, Halloween.
Yeah, well, the semester starts at Halloween, and I mean, they're witchcraft, so they are think spooky. That qualifies as spooky. You will
do
learn to
any
talk
of them
to
involve
ghosts in Introduction
pumpkin carving and ghosts, or just
pumpkins.
Ghosts? Okay,
I mean,
well, tell me about the classes then.
You could carve a pentacle on a pumpkin, but it seems hard.
Which pentacle do you think would be best for a pumpkin? Would it be a Mercury pentacle, perhaps?
Because they're orange?
Yeah.
I would think a Venus pentacle because they're a fruit.
Oh, okay,
and,
that makes
full
sense.
Of seeds.
So, okay, yeah.
That is my initial instinct. You could do like a cursing pentacle and then just leave it to like decay and rot like jack-o'-lanterns
Or
do.
you could do a cursing pentacle, put it on somebody's porch, and then smash it there, perhaps.
I mean, definitely. Don't do that at home, kids.
Yeah, please don't listen.
So I have
so the classes.
my 2-year-long classes that are restarting at Halloween. Introduction to Witchcraft, 13 lessons in the practice of magic is pretty much what it sounds like.
Okay.
It is, you can come in as an absolute beginner. Like, you need to know English. Like, you actually don't. That course is also available in Italian, Chinese, and soon Spanish.
How do you speak all those languages?
No, there are people who translate.
Okay, that's cool.
I have colleagues, I have collaborators who translate. I'm in the market for a Russian translator, by the way, if anybody listening to this is a native
Okay, if there are any Russian translators listening, contact Sara Mastros.
Yeah.
Her contact information is in the show notes.
It is. So Introduction to Witchcraft, it is designed for beginners, but objectively, I would say less than half of the people in the class are actually complete beginners. A lot of people in that class... Okay, ahead, yeah.
What kind of witchcraft are you doing? Is it like Wicca, or is it like folk magic-y witchcraft?
So it is not so Wicca's a religion, right? And so when I talk about witchcraft, I never mean a religion. I mean the craft that witches practice, which we could call magic or sorcery or probably lots of other words, but I prefer the word witchcraft for what are essentially political reasons, right?
Okay.
So they start off learning, and really the goal in that class, as I think of it, is to learn like fundamental magical skills so that you can really go into any style of magic, right? And be able to like understand what is going on. So I'm not saying you can master any kind of magic, but like you can show up at anybody's magical ritual and like you understand what is doing and you are prepared to learn that kind of magic. So skills like divination, writing petitions, mediumship, like conjuring and talking to spirits, casting circles, I maybe already said, internal energy work, cursing, curse breaking, planetary magic, sort of like all the like what I think of as fundamental building blocks, right?
Nice.
You learn,
okay,
and
that
you learn
sounds
a
super
lot
useful.
of different techniques. I mean, obviously, I can only teach, like, sort of techniques that I know, right? So, certainly the techniques they learn sort of cluster around sort of, like, Mediterranean-style magic. There's a lot of Jewish magic, a lot of Hebrew magic, a lot of Greek magic, a lot of American folk magic, because that's a lot of what I do, but all kinds of other stuff as well. So, that course, it's 13 lessons, 1 lesson a month. And then my other course is on the planetary pentacles. So the pentacle book is really like the textbook for that pentacle course. It'll actually be the textbook for the intro class will be out next year.
Nice.
But you actually get access to it. Like you get it right away. I mean, like most textbooks, right? I think you teach a course a bunch of times before you write a textbook. I think that's the normal, right? So I had taught the pentacle course, I'm going to say 3 years by the time I wrote the book as well. Yeah, so those courses are starting over at Halloween. Those are both year-long courses. And then
Wait, you only said one course. Oh, the Pentacles course is the
Intro
second
and Pentacles is 2 courses. Yeah.
Okay.
And then I also have a bunch of shorter courses. So some like 3 to 6 month courses, and also a bunch of like one-shot lessons on like special topics in that.
Nice. Okay, cool. And those are all at your website.
Witchlessons.com.
Witchlessons.com. Witch is in pointy hat, not as in the question word. Yes.
Correct.
And there'll be a link to that in the show notes. Maybe that's the only link. We'll find out. We'll find out later when I write the show notes. So let's talk about then your pentacles. Like,
sure.
The Pentacles, like the Key of Solomon, is the book that the Pentacles originated in. I think the version that most people are going to... I'm actually going
to push back on a little bit of that. It is not at all clear to me. I actually think the Pentacles originated separately and were added into the Key of Solomon.
I stand corrected.
I mean, it's actually, that is quite speculative on my part, and not all of my colleagues would agree with me on that.
Well, what I had meant to start with was that the version that most people are familiar with is probably the Key of Solomon that Mathers translated, the Golden Dawn guy.
Certainly, that's the kind I came up on. And until like 10 years ago, that was really the only accessible version.
Yeah,
maybe
yeah, for sure.
15 years ago. I guess I'm old and I've been doing this for a long time.
I mean, I honestly don't remember the first time that I saw a separate version, but it was sooner than 15 years ago. But then again, you know, there's a lot of occult stuff out there. I first
saw the Solomonic Pentacles in 1994. I'm going to say, when I was a
Well,
junior in high school.
But I don't think I'd seen any of the Golden Dawn stuff in the early 90s. I
didn't see them in the context of the Golden Dawn. Like, I saw them, I saw the Key of Solomon, like the modernization of the Key of Solomon, but I didn't, let me think, I joined the Golden Dawn in late 1996. Wow. But then I quit like a month later, so.
But the thing so I never really explored the Key of Solomon after I was first introduced to it, simply because like there's so much stuff in there. Like, you know, there's so many preparations you have to do. There's so much. I mean, honestly, like the Christian stuff really threw me off. But also you need like daggers and aprons and lots of parchment and lots of other stuff. And then the pentacles themselves always seemed like just way too specific, so I hadn't really spent very much time exploring them. But then later on, I discovered that they get used in like root work and like American folk magic sometimes, where, you know, they get traced out and, you know, scribble on the back and all that kind of stuff. So I experimented a little bit with that. So your book was really exciting to me because you approached them in a way where it was like, you analyzed them. You looked at them and were like, oh, this is some bad Hebrew. Oh, this is some confusing stuff. Oh, this comes from this part.
They have words on them. And so
they do. And some of the words are not right.
Instructions written on them. Like, they have this reputation. A lot of Hebrew, I mean, okay, I'm going to back up a little bit, and for the audience who doesn't know what we're talking about, and just explain. So the Key of Solomon is, we talk about it as a single text, but it's really like a family of related magical texts. It's unclear where it arose, probably in like the 1300s-ish, probably in Italy, probably the first versions of it were written in Latin. Although it claims to be taught by King Solomon, right? But it obviously is not. In the form we have it obviously is not. It's quite Christian, right? There are 2 books. Book 1 is basically like, it teaches you how to like prepare a bunch of tools, robes and daggers and whatnot, like you were saying. And then book 2, basically you learn how to use those tools to basically like conjure angels and make them do shit, right? Yeah. And then in between books 1 and 2, not in either book, are these pentacles, right? Which is part of my reasoning for the fact that like I think that they're a later edition, right? Like, I don't necessarily, like, I think they came from elsewhere. The other reason I think that is because they're in Hebrew, and if you have any familiarity at all with Hebrew amulets, like if you just go to a Judaica store and look at some Hebrew amulets, the pentacles are very clearly in that category. Like, they're just that kind of magic. They, like, whether you, like, you don't have to read Hebrew at all, just looking at them, you'd be like, oh, these are clearly in that category of, right? And they have this reputation for being really obscure, but they're not obscure, they're just in Hebrew. Like, they have instructions written on them. And so when I first encountered the Key of Solomon, I was like 15 years old and pretty gullible. So like, when it said it was taught by King Solomon, I just believed them. And I actually, my first grimoire, I didn't have the whole Key of Solomon. What I had was a book called Ritual Magic by Eliza Marion Butler, which is like a historian writing about grimoires. So it has like excerpts from a lot of different, which I'm really glad because I didn't have a full grimoire, I couldn't fall into that, oh, I do it just like the book says trap. Which, first of all, I do it just the way the textbook taught me to is not the flex people think it is. And also,
it really isn't.
Like, the books don't really have coherent, like, almost none of them, certainly not the Key of Solomon, like, it does not provide fully detailed instructions. Like, you actually can't do it. Like, people who say that, I'm maybe skeptical that they read that book. Because I don't think you can do it exactly the way the book said. I think that's an excuse people use to not do things. Right? You
it's
have
like,
to do it exactly the book says, and then they just don't do it. But I didn't have that option. And also, I was gullible. So, like, when it said it was taught by King Solomon, I was like, oh, well, that means that, I know that Christians are always trying to put their Christian nonsense on top of Jewish stuff. So I just took all the Christianity out. Yeah. And, like, rewrote the prayers. So I just kind of, like, patched it together. I had a piece of this grimoire and a piece of that grimoire, and I just patched it together. Like, Dr. Butler did a really good job laying out for me, like, the general structure of how this magic was supposed to work, and I had little bits and pieces of it, and I pieced them all together and filled in the gaps with, like, I don't know, some Jewish stuff, whatever kind of felt right. Some stuff I saw wizards do in movies. Like, I just figured it out, right?
Uh-huh.
And that worked great. Like, no complaints. So, and then shortly after that, so I'd been doing that for like, I don't know, a year or two. And then I got my hands on a copy of the Key of Solomon with these pentacles in it, right? The pentacles are in Hebrew.
Uh-huh.
At that time, I did not read Hebrew. Like, I mean, I knew the alphabet and could, like, sound words out and recognize some words, but I in no way read Hebrew.
Right.
But, like, they had words on them. And so it seemed immediately clear to me that it probably mattered what those words said.
Uh-huh.
And then, nobody but me seemed to care what those words said. Like, there were all these books, but none of them answered what I thought would be a pretty straightforward question. What does it say? Like, there's words, what do they say? But it turns out that is not a straightforward question. And so I spent, the next 20 years figuring that out. I mean, I did lots of other stuff, too. I got a degree in mathematics. I did tons of other kinds of magic. But on and off, I would come back to these pentacles, which I really loved. I mean, I just immediately, as soon as I saw them, I was like, oh, these are awesome. I am into this.
I mean, they are just great-looking symbols, magical-looking symbols on their own.
They weren't super Christian, which I didn't care for. They clearly had some, like, really cool geometry. And they were, like, this puzzle. Because, like, even, like, my rabbi couldn't, like, so that's the first thing I did. I mean, not the first thing, but, like, I went to a rabbi and I was like, hey, can you help me read this? And it turned out...
Oh, hold on. Actually, your Jewish background is probably very important in understanding how you came to these things. So you were raised...
My mom's Jewish. My dad's Greek. I grew up, Jewish. If you had asked me when I was, like, 10 what my religion was, I definitely would have said Jewish.
Okay.
If you had asked me at 14 what my religion was, it would have depended on the context. I maybe would have said Jewish. I maybe would have said witch.
Uh-huh.
Because I had been taught, so by that point, I was, like, familiar with what Wicca was.
Mm-hmm.
And I was taught that witchcraft was a religion, which I found deeply disappointing, because I was not really into religion. I was the opiate of the masses. Like, I wasn't really there for that. I just wanted to, do fucking magic. But all the like, witches I met told me I had to be Wiccan. So I was a Wiccan, but not a very good one.
Uh-huh.
Just like I was a Jew, but, like, not a very good one. Like, I'm just not... I know this sounds weird for a person who lives my life. I understand
not
that religious.
That approach to witchcraft, I totally understand. Like, when I was that age, I also, all of the books on magic that I had at the time were all Wicca witchcraft books. Yeah. So I thought that I had to be Wiccan too, but I never got initiated into any.
I mean, I did, but it didn't take. Similarly, I got initiated into the Golden Dawn, but that didn't.
So you've just been collecting these initiations, huh? Which one is your favorite?
It's because I was looking for actual magic. Okay, so actually,
right.
I will tell you, quite recently, I was initiated into the cult of Diana Nemerensis at Lake Mead.
Uh-huh.
It is the only time in my entire life someone has handed me, a magical a magical system that I didn't have to dig out of the dirt and, like, put together myself. Like, somebody just gave it. Julia Tarola just gave it to me, and it's beautiful, and I love it. Now, am I going to eventually become disillusioned with this, too? I mean, historically, yes, but
I'll check back in a couple years. I'll check back in a couple years, and we'll see how it's going.
I will say it is so similar to things I did dig out of the dirt myself and have been doing for years. Let me think what I'm allowed to say about this. Julia told me that, like, one of the reasons she wanted me to do this work with her is because I was actually teaching some of her initiatory secrets.
Ooh.
Like, I had discovered them myself in, like, a slightly different form.
Isn't this the same sort of story behind, like, Aleister Crowley joining the OTO, where they were like, oh, we're going to initiate you because you've already been telling people our secrets?
Yeah, but I mean, she and I are less obnoxious about it, so she wasn't like...
Yeah.
She didn't tell me that until after. She just was like...
Okay.
But I honestly, I don't recommend... People who know me will say, like, I don't always recommend everything that my friends do. Like, when I recommend something, it's because I really think it's genuinely great. And Julia's class, oh gosh, what is it even called? I think it's called Diana Nemorensis, The Lake and Her Mysteries, or something like that. I'll get you a link for it. It is amazing. I genuinely loved it, that class. And then, this summer I went to Italy. I got, Diana baptized in Lake Nemi. Gorgeous. So that is definitely my favorite magical initiation so far. That I didn't have to do myself. Like, the kind where somebody else did the work. Beautiful. Beautiful. But I don't, I'm a difficult collaborator. I don't take instruction. It's very...
Well, let's get back to the pentacles.
Yeah. So these pentacles, I really love them. I went to the rabbi and I was like, hey, can you help me read these? And he tried. But he was like, I don't know. Like, a lot of these I don't think are worth... And, he wasn't willing to do, so much work. We didn't go to synagogue. This wasn't... I said my rabbi, but I just meant, the rabbi that I knew because he was a business associate of my dad's. Who was, the reform rabbi, I'd been in his synagogue. I'd been, to people's bar mitzvahs and stuff, but we didn't go to synagogue.
It was the sort of thing where he's like, this isn't why I became a rabbi and learned Hebrew. It wasn't to help a teenager decipher
oh, no, I think
texts.
he just, I think he just had better stuff to do. He was not, there are rabbis who definitely that is why they became a rabbi, but he was not
for
one
sure.
of those rabbis. He helped, and we got to the point where, pentacles are circular diagrams. They have Hebrew around
Except for the square one. But, generally they're circular. They have Hebrew around the outside edge. 43 out of 44 of them are circular. They have Hebrew around the outside edge, and that is almost always a quote from Torah. Yeah, except for the ones that have Greek around the outside edge.
I would argue that, many of them are translated. You'll see in my book sometimes I put them in English, but, they're definitely...
I was just trying to be a jerk. That was...
No, it's fine. I'm there for that. I'm just saying, if we're going to actually about pentacles, I'm probably...
Well, actually...
So the rabbi basically, he and I did enough of them to come to the idea that, around the outside circle was almost certainly a Torah verse. And so those I could track down, right? I beefed up my Hebrew, and eventually I tried to... But then on the inside, there would, sometimes be angel names, and sometimes be, holy names of God. And those you could read, but there was also, other stuff.
Yeah.
That was hard. And again, this whole time, I just assumed I couldn't find the book somebody had written that explained this. Because these pentacles are hundreds of years old, so why the fuck did none of these people explain this? I found it infuriating. Every book I write is because I'm mad that somebody else hasn't already written it. Every book I've written. Orphic Hymns, same deal. I was just mad that nobody had made a modern translation. Which it turned out Patrick Dunn was doing at the same time as me. Ours came out in rapids. And if I had known that, I probably wouldn't have bothered to do it myself.
Well, I did get Patrick Dunn's first.
They're different.
And I love his too. And
yeah, me too.
I will confess that I have Patrick Dunn's version in hard copy and yours is an ebook. So I do use his way more often just because it's I
like mine better than his, but I'm saying not enough better. If
you should.
I should it would actually be tragic. It would be tragic if his book came out because we finished them basically. They came out in rapids, and neither of us knew what the other one was doing until too late. I would, if his book had come out a couple years earlier, I just wouldn't have bothered. His are great. I would have just done something else. I did it. That's what I'm saying. Every book I write, it's because I'm mad that book doesn't exist. It's a book I want to exist that just doesn't, and eventually I just get so frustrated that I do it myself. And that's what ended up with the Pentacles. I would, I would go do other things and I would eventually come back to them.
So the interior of the Pentacles...
The interior of the Pentacles has some combination, for most of them, some kind of geometry... And then, not all of them, a couple of them have figural illustrations of hands. There's a cool one with a
hands.
Scorpion,
There's the one with there's the one with the face that always really bugged me. You did a great job addressing that. The face that looks like Moses, but it's not.
I'll show you in the Hebrew. Okay, so the Mathers edition, and Mathers is doing the same thing I did, right? Where he has these I'm gonna say corrupt, but it's a complicated word, corrupt, because it implies there's like some kind of perfect original version that I'm a little skeptical about. But like, I mean, some of them are corrupt in the sense like the person who copied this book obviously doesn't even know the Hebrew alphabet, and some of these things are squiggles and not even letters. So like that, I'm willing to definitely call corrupt. But Mathers, and
I'm a Freemason, so I'm very familiar with corrupt Hebrew. Like it's everywhere in Masonic stuff. Masonic stuff is just filled with it.
Samuel Mathers, S.L. McGregor Mathers. We talk about him a lot, but I'm reasonably confident that his Key of Solomon is actually very much a collaboration between him and his wife Moina Mathers, who was born Mina Bergson. She's Henri Bergson's little sister. She's the daughter of a quite important Jewish intellectual family, right?
Really? I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. Her great-grandmother, Temeril Bergson, basically founded Neo-Hasidism. Like, that is a
Really? Are you serious?
Yeah, like, she's a really important figure. And, like, if you look at, like, a timeline of Mathers' books, there's, like, this year where he suddenly gets really good at Hebrew that I'm pretty skeptical about, but that's also the year he got married to Mina Bergson, who changed her name to Moina Mathers. So, like, I think she collaborated on that book a lot more than is perhaps credited. But, like, he's got these corrupt ones, and he, as a magician, like, you know, Mathers is maybe not that, I mean, he's not, like, a bad scholar or anything, but certainly by modern standards of scholarship, like, he's not that great of a scholar.
Yeah.
But, like, he's a brilliant magician and, like, mythopoet. And so he takes what he has and constructs a coherent magic out of it, right?
Right.
But I think he could have done better. And, you know, he doesn't, like, explain himself at all. So he also, which I understand how that happens. You know, magic is illegal in Christendom for, like, most of its history. And people have this idea that Solomonic magic is Christian, but that is simply false. Solomonic magic is complicated, but arises before Christianity even exists, right? And sort of breaks into these parallel sort of strands, where there's like a Jewish Solomonic magic and an Arabic and later Muslim, like, Solomonic magic, and a Christian branch. And people just only know about the Christian branch because that's the only kind that's in European languages, and, you know, nobody gives a shit about stuff that's not done by white people, so we really only ever see in English, you only ever see the, like, European Christian kinds. But there are all these, like, there's other versions, right?
Yeah.
And so, but Mathers, like, he only has access to, like, a relatively small number of European manuscripts, right? And he's sort of piecing them together. But, you know, he doesn't, like, cite his sources, and there's this tradition in Christian grimoires of not citing your sources, which I understand, because citing sources is the same as naming names.
I would say
right? And it's illegal.
Right.
But, you know, in Jewish manuscripts, like, so I'm working with a Hebrew manuscript of the Pentacles now, a Jewish Hebrew manuscript called Sefer HaOtot, the Book of Seals, right? And, like, on the very first page, it's like, my name is Isaac Zekel. Here's my dad's name. He lives in Worms. I copied this book from Judah Perez. He lives in London. He got it. Blah, 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 blah. And then on, like, every page, not every page, but many times, there are, like, these marginal notes where he's like, well, it says this here, but in another version of this manuscript that I saw, blah, 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 it says this. We're like, I have also seen this in a book by the Holy Ari, Isaac Luria, but this one is better. Like, there's no compulsion to keep it a secret. Like, I think some people, sometimes, and I think this comes about because scholars of magic sometimes say this, scholars of magic who do not do magic, sometimes say things like, yo, the power of magic comes from its secrecy, but, like, that, I have never met a practicing magician who thinks that's true. Like, I certainly don't think it's true. I've surveyed a lot of magicians on this topic, and no one is of that opinion, right? But sometimes you read scholars say things like, oh, the power of magic comes from its secrecy, or, like, people seek out professional magicians because of the power of their esoteric knowledge. And, like, that's true, but that's also why I hire a plumber, is for their knowledge of, like, esoteric plumbing shit that I don't know. Like, that's just being a professional. That's a fact about labor economics and not a fact about...
I mean, honestly, isn't plumbing just applied topology?
You know, the very first lesson my father ever taught me in plumbing was shit won't flow uphill. And I think about that metaphor quite a lot.
Yeah.
So, like, the notion that, like, magic has to be kept secret is a side effect of it being illegal in Christian Europe. So Christian manuscripts, like, so Mathers is in that tradition, so of course he's not gonna, like, like, even though magic isn't illegal for him, he's just in this tradition where it is, like, normative to not explain anything.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Which I find frustrating. Like, so I try really hard to explain, in all my books, I try really hard to articulate, like, here is what it says, I think it should say this, and here's why I think that, and you can believe me or not, but, like, I lay out my reasoning, like, here's how I use this pentacle, and here's why, right? And similar, even, like, in the incense book, it's the same thing. I would look at recipes for incense, and I'd be like, why does this have juniper in it? Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. But nobody ever answered that question. So my recipes, I, like, explain in detail, like, why those things are in it. Because I think of magic a lot like cooking, right? That, like, when you're first starting to learn, you use a recipe.
Yeah.
But eventually you start to understand those recipes. And, like, you understand why those ingredients are there in those proportions. And then you learn to, like, make up your own recipes. And I feel like magic is the same. And that's why I'm not a big fan of, like, oh, I did it exactly the way. The word grimoire means textbook. Grimoire bros lose their fucking mind when I translate grimoire as a wizard textbook. But that's what that word means. It's related to the word grammar, like grammar school. And, like,
Hold on. I want to highlight grimoire bros. I love that term. I'm going to use that from now on.
Please do. Please do. Well,
I usually call them
bros.
I usually call them grimoire purists, but that sounds way too fancy, and now they are grimoire bros.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, you can be a grimoire purist without being a dick about it. But grimoire
Possibly.
bros are dicks.
I would like to see that happen. I don't know that I've met a grimoire
Well, I
purist.
think they maybe just don't. I think you wouldn't see it because they don't feel the need to flex about it all over.
Right, right.
I think that's just like a dick behavior.
Do you even grimoire, bro?
Yeah, right? Yeah, those people. Like, we all know who we're talking about. Like, I'm not going to name names, and I don't even mean necessarily specific people. We all understand, like, the category of person I mean. But, again, the word grimoire means textbook, and, like, as a person who has also written, like, math textbooks, you know, the goal is not to do it exactly like the textbook does. Like, you do some textbook examples, which are really, like, caricatured examples. Right? Like, when you're teaching, you don't just do, like, when I'm teaching math or witchcraft, I'm not just demonstrating what I do. Like, demonstrating is not teaching. Teaching is an art where you, like, pick specific demonstrations to, like, highlight specific things. And those demonstrations, you're always going to, like, caricature up whatever it is you're trying to explain. And that's not the way it works in the real world, right? You, like...
Right.
Right? And so I think magic is like that. So I try, just like when I taught math, I don't just do a problem on the board and then walk off to prove how smart I am, because that's not my goal. I, like, explain what I'm doing and why I do it in that order. And I try and approach magic in books, but also in courses the same way. So it's I do one, we do one, you do one. Like, I do an example, I explain my reasoning, I walk people through one, and then I just make them do it themselves. And so every book
I like
I write,
that. That's a good approach. I do one, we do one, you do one.
That's like a teacher buzzword that they teach you in. They actually don't tell you that anywhere. I mean, if you taught high school and they made you to go... Here, they basically sit you in a room all day long for, like, in-service, and they say that, but it takes them, like, 8 hours to say that, because I don't know why. Here's the thing. The people who teach at teacher in-service don't seem very good at teaching, has been my experience.
Well, I mean, you know what they say? They say that those who can do, and those who can't do, teach, right? So people who are teaching...
But I don't think that is the case. I would actually argue that teaching is a very high form of medicine.
I was just trying to make a joke about teaching, you know, like...
I know. I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of, like, the
we won't. We already have...
that is teaching in America.
We already have 43 round rabbit holes and 1 square rabbit hole to go down.
Exactly.
Yes. I have a really specific question that I just thought of when you brought up your translation of a Hebrew manuscript of the Pentacles. So the second pentacle of Mars, which you called the Shield of Yeshua, has Yeshua in it.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, in the Hebrew manuscript, is that there?
No. Of course not.
Okay. Well,
also, like, first of all, fun fact, That's not even how you spell Jesus in Hebrew. That spelling for Jesus did not arise until like the 1600s. It's like fully
Well, I know. It's from Christian Kabbalah. It's from the Christian Kabbalists,
I mean, like, what I'm saying is the pentacles are older than that spelling. The pentacles in Sefer HaOtot, almost all of them are... Here's what I would say. Approximately 2/3 of them are recognizable antecedent. Okay, so first of all, the book I'm working with is a relatively late manuscript, 17... You'd think I would know this date. I'm going to say like 1730, I think, right? But, it's a copy, but here's what I will say. I understand it to be like a much less corrupt, with all the like caveats that I would put around that word, manuscript than basically any other manuscript I've seen, because it is clearly being written by someone with like both authored by and has a full chain of transmission. The entire chain of transmission for this manuscript appears to be not just Hebrew literate the way I'm Hebrew literate, but like hard Hebrew literate. Like you can tell
like native speaker sort of.
I mean,
or very close.
Sort of, except Hebrew, like, at that time was not anybody's colloquial spoken language. But
right.
yeah,
so maybe native isn't right, but fluent. There's a level of fluency.
Super fluent, and, like, fluent in a technical way, right? Like, has a complex and technical understanding of grammar, writes poetry in that language, like, highly, highly literate. And you can tell based on, like, the annotations, right? But also, this is radio, so I'm not going to bother showing a picture, but... if you look at the pentacles in Sefer HaOtot, the ones that are recognizable, they have way, way more text on them. So, like, in Mathers, where it'll have, like, one letter in, like, every point of a star, Sefer HaOtot has, like, full words. So, like, they have way more words. And that, first of all, to me, is a sign that they are less corrupt, because you don't, like, gain letters in the, like, in this process of, like, whisper down the lane, you don't, like, gain letters, right? You're just gonna lose stuff.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But also, it's in code. And I say that, again, as a person who is a mathematician. Like, we wrote more than one computer program to crack these. So here's an example. What
kind of code? Is it using @bash or some other sort of code?
Sometimes there are little ciphers like that. A lot of times, the most common thing it does is it will take a Torah verse, and then it will create what's called a notiricon, which is basically you make an acronym out of the verse. And as you can imagine, it is very easy to go from a verse to an acronym. But it is not so easy to go from an acronym back to a verse.
You would have to create a database of acronymed parts of the Torah.
We wrote a little computer program to do basically that. I mean, it's not a database.
Nice.
Like, we just searched the text, basically.
It's not,
I mean, it's not like a hard algorithm to write, but that's not how Isaac is doing it. Isaac is doing it because he has the entire Torah memorized. Isaac, the scribe of this text. I'm now on a first-name basis with him as I pour through his work.
As you should be, if you're spending that much time with him, even
But really, I'm not even talking about him. I'm talking about him plus... Like, he's just the person who copied the particular manuscript I have. And I assume the person who wrote all the marginal notations, which do appear to be in the same handwriting. Every once in a while, there's, like, a really loopy handwriting, which is like maybe another
Rashi
person.
Style or something?
It's cursive, like it's script. No,
right.
I don't mean so
not the modern script.
It's similar-ish to, like, modern Israeli cursive, but two different... I struggled with it a lot. I gave up and worked and partnered up with a specialist.
I've seen manuscripts like that, and I have found them impossible to read. Or impossible is a strong word. I've found them frustratingly difficult to read. Enough that I give up on them too.
Same. Also, like, I have, like, photocopies of a microfiche of this manuscript. I do not have the actual. Although partway through the project, we, like, wrote the library, was like, hey, can you, like, take us some 21st century photos? So we actually do have higher quality scans of these manuscript images that I am not permitted to share, but I am trying to convince them to share. But the scans, I mean, you can see the scans on the National Library of Israel website. So anybody who wants to can see this book that I'm working with. Like, it's not a secret. I mean, it was a secret until we had them dig it out and put it on the website. Which, here's a tip for, like, magicians out there. Any library and most museums, if you write an email Like, you have to be nice, and I am very charming, so maybe this doesn't work for everybody. But if you write an email that says basically, like, you have this manuscript, here's the manuscript number, will you scan that entire book and send it to me? They say yes. Because that's why people become rare book librarians, is because
they want to share that shit. Yeah.
That's why they got into that. They didn't get into that because they like putting books on shelves. So libraries basically will always do that for you. Museums, sometimes they will, sometimes they will. But I've also written to many museums and been like, can you send me a high-res 21st century photo and also tell me everything you know about this? And they're like, yeah, I fucking can. And then they're like, can we Zoom and I will talk to you about this forever? Because geeks like to tell you about their geek shit. Like, that's why they, they want to talk about it, actually.
Oh,
they
yeah.
Eager to have somebody listen. So you can pretty much always...
that's why podcasts work, isn't it?
Right. Like, you can write a museum and be like, will you please nerd out about this for me? And they will do that. Or they will pawn you off on a grad student who will do that. Right. So that's how so we got this manuscript. And we're digging through it. So there's codes. There's, like, a lot of the words in Mathers that, like, I tried to interpret as words. Now that I'm seeing this Hebrew manuscript are maybe corrupted code versions. So, at the end of the month, which is why, remember at the very beginning, I was like, oh, I'm so sick of cracking Hebrew codes. At the end of the month, I will have a PDF out of the transcription and translation and, like, preliminary code cracking, right? But the only way you can get it is to have supported my Kickstarter in the past, or join my Pentacle course in probably about a year and a half or 2 years, right? And if you do that, you also get access to, like, a robust community where we work with these never before seen, like, magic together. And in about 2 years, we'll have out, like, a critical edition will come out from Hadean with, like, everything that's in the mod. So full transcription, full translation, hopefully these good manuscript images, but I'm still talking to them and trying to get permission for that. Brand new, gorgeous, full-color illustrations from Elizabeth Imperium. They look like this.
Ooh, it's a really cool-looking rose with a pentacle over it for those of you who are... Yeah,
this one's hard to read. They're better than that one, actually. That's like a bad...
Well, I like... That looked cool.
The color... They're just hard to read because the colors are messed up.
Well, yeah.
That's like an early draft. Yeah,
I mean, nobody can tell. Nobody who's listening can tell that it was hard to read. So I'm just going to say it was crisp and gorgeous, and it looked like a rose. Well,
the new ones are. This is a very early draft. And also my printer is bullshit. It's really the issue with this is actually not her art. It's actually my.
But
printer.
Again, like nobody can see. You shouldn't be making excuses for things that people can't actually see.
So, and it'll also have, similar to the Mathers book, it'll have commentary. It'll have use. That'll be out in I don't know, maybe 2 years. But if you want early access, of course, you get early access plus. Well,
that sounds awesome.
Yeah,
I've heard already that your Pentacle course is incredible. So that sounds like a good deal.
I mean, I love teaching and I love Pentacles, so
that's a really good combination.
Yeah,
I have to like gush a little bit about some of the things that I really like in the Sorcery of Solomon. Okay. You have like a really honest way of writing about your experience with your like magical stuff, right? So like there are pentacles in here where you're like, this one's too corrupt, I never tried to use it, or other ones where you're like, this one's for summoning rain, and where I live we've got too much rain, so I never used it. So you're honest about like the ones you used, the ones you didn't use.
I at least appear to be honest. Yeah.
Okay, well, I mean...
I'm kidding. Sorry.
but I also really like how on some of them where their function seems to be a little obscure, you'll be like, oh yeah, I just use this one to like crank up the power of other pentacles. I appreciate that a lot because it just seems like in a lot of magic books, people just try to be like, oh yes, I'm an expert in everything that happened in this book.
Yeah, I think
so. That was refreshing.
I've been talking to other magicians a lot, and I think for people who actually do magic, I think there are certain telltale signs in a book where you're reading it and you're like, oh, this person doesn't actually do this. And for me, there's also telltale signs that they do. And for me, the telltale signs are things like, open a window before you do this, because there's going to be a lot of smoke. Or like,
oh, man,
you're going to need a towel. Like, when I read those, I'm like, this person has actually done this. Whereas sometimes you read books and they lay out a ritual. And like, even if you just imagine doing that ritual, it becomes clear that you cannot do it as written because you
Right,
have
like how
to
many arms do you need for this ritual?
Yeah, you have to reach directly through the bonfire to do what they're telling you to do. Like even, and that's what I mean about, like, sometimes people who say, I did it just by the book, don't seem like they did. Because I don't think, like, again, even just carefully imagining a ritual, which, like, is not as good as doing a ritual, but truthfully, it's a lot better than pretending to have done a ritual. Like, pretending to do it, much better than pretending to have done it.
You know, I have an incense story.
Oh, please.
I think this might have been during the pandemic, maybe a little bit before, but somebody turned me on to like a incense, like a resin incense store online where somebody like was sourcing like really high quality, you know, real resins. And I had been kind of having frustration with Styrax benzoin, you know, like what the heck is it? Where do you get it? What do all these things mean? So they had on this, is that what it means?
No, I'm just saying it's like sticky and messy is my experience with it.
Oh, I got like a hard resin, but
I guess I'm sure there's a hard resin too.
Well, there's multiple
all
types too.
Resins start off sticky and get hard as you dry them out. Like they all come out of sticky.
What I learned as I was reading about it is there's like Storax and Styrax and benzoin and like all these different things, and maybe they refer to the same stuff or maybe not. But on this website, they had like a really high quality Styrax benzoin, so I got it, and I was very excited because the blends that I'd smelled of this stuff had really smelled amazing. So you know, I mean, I got my little censer and I lit the charcoal and I did just like I do with frankincense every day or whatever, and I put some of that Styrax on there. The smoke that filled my room was caustic. Like I couldn't even breathe in it. I was like, oh my God, this is just the worst
brutal,
shit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and so I suddenly realized.
Like,
I think it's mostly, but I feel like what I discovered is it's mostly used sort of like as a spice addition to a blend, and not as a thing all on its own, which really makes me wonder what the cheap stuff that I got ever was.
You know, I
don't even know.
Similarly, I was really disappointed actually the first time I smelled like genuine amber. Because, like, you know that, like, really cheap amber... I don't know if guys remember this, but that used to come in those, like, sandstone... Like, okay, so at the mall in the... For young people, maybe this still exists, I don't know. At the mall in the 90s, you used to be able to buy this, like, hard perfume, like a perfume, like, salve. And it came in these little carved sandstone things, and it was labeled amber, but is actually, like, a fully artificial... I love that smell, actually. I don't, if they still make those things, I want them. I love them. But that's what I expected real amber to smell like, and it does not. I mean, I like real amber too, but like, actually the fake amber scent we were sold in the 90s is really completely unlike actual amber.
Yeah. Oh man. I mean, also
I like both
just
of them. But yeah, I think a lot about those little, like, they came in these carved stone containers that I thought were like, when I was 14, that was the coolest, witchiest shit ever. And I loved it. And I still
or just like working through like the PGM, you discover very quickly that a lot of the shit they're burning, they're not doing it because it smells good.
No. Well, also though, like, so here's something I will say, having written a book on incense, and like, I get asked in interviews a lot about advice for beginner magicians, and my advice is to get a co-magician as soon as you can. And I was really lucky. Oh, 100%. 100%. Like, there is no substitute for a co-magician. Like, first of all, it allows you to specialize, like, labor in ritual. So one person can be really deep in trance, while one person is, like, on point paying attention. And it's very hard to do both of those things at once. And, like, you can, but it's a somewhat advanced skill to do, like, in a decal-y type setup.
Yeah.
Right?
I see what you're saying.
But also, having a co-magician, it, like, forces you to, like, explain things. And they will call you on your bullshit in both directions. They'll be like, no, Sarah, you're actually talking crack. Like, you're just high, and you are saying mystic nonsense that makes no sense. But also, on the other hand, when they'll be like, no, Sarah, you're just depressed. Magic is definitely real. Do you remember that time we were in the graveyard and blah, 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 blah? Like, it's really hard to deny it happened when there's a witness. But my co-magician, like, I had a co-magician super early. I met her in Girl Scouts. She is now a professor of botanical medicine. So, like, my interest
Sweet.
Yeah, right? Like, she's a witch doctor now. My interest in plant magic is really because of her, right? And so I actually, like, know a surprising amount about phytochemistry because I lived with her while she was in plant doctor school.
Yeah, I suspect that also the fact that you're smart makes it so that you absorb knowledge very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what smart means. I mean, but she's also super smart. But, like, something I noticed in that Incense book is, like, you know, particularly people who translate magic don't really know about plants.
True.
And so, like, now, like, if I look at the PGM, like, now that I have more Greek, when I go back and look, like, their translation of plants is sometimes they are just fundamentally wrong about what that plant is. Because the common name for a plant, like, they just translate it word for word. But, like, that's not the plant. Like, that is not the right plant that they are talking about. Yeah. Identifying plants in ancient manuscripts, even not ancient, but old. So, like, even the Sefer HaOtot, when it mentions plants, it's, like, not always that easy to figure out or plants or animals. It's not always that easy to figure out what plant or animal he is talking about. Without having that background in, like, well, I know a lot about plants and plant magic, so I think he has to mean this. Like, there's one I worked on today that calls for an incense of Pinocchio. I'm pretty sure he means pine resin. It literally means pine eye. First of all, it's not Pinocchio. It's this guy trying to transliterate Pinocchio into Hebrew.
Yeah. Okay.
And, like, you know how there are so many different ways to spell Hanukkah in English? Well, it goes the other way, too. So when he's trying to, use a not Hebrew word for something, he has to do it in Hebrew characters, and it's, like, not... Right. And he's terrible at it. Like, his transliterations of Greek are garbage.
It makes you wonder, like, what was his pronunciation like? Of Hebrew, like in real life, you know, because a lot of that transliteration is going to depend on how you pronounce it.
Right, and well, the other problem is he says, like, and then, so he gives a Hebrew name, but that's like a biblical Hebrew name, and he's trying to describe a European animal. So, like, a lot of times he calls for, like, some kind of parchment, which we've been translating as gazelle. Does it mean deer? What kind of deer? I think, actually, it just means any kosher deer-like animal that is undomesticated. That's what I think he means. Okay. But then he says, or in the vernacular, and then he has some transliterated word. But here's the problem. We don't know what that vernacular is. It's sort of like modern Spanish and sort of like modern Italian, but it's definitely not either of those.
And it's not Ladino?
We don't know, so it's maybe Ladino. I think it's probably Ladino, which is like Judeo-Spanish.
Yeah.
My colleagues think it's maybe an old form of Italian. You know, Italian, even today, is not exactly a single language. Like, there are so many regional dialects of Italian, and, like, in the 1720s, or whenever this manuscript was written, really... So we don't even know what the language is, and it's some kind of Romance language. So anyway, Pinocchio, it literally means pine eyes. So I think he probably means pine resin. Because the other option would be pine nuts, but it seems ridiculous. Like, I tried burning some pine nuts on incense charcoal.
Oh, how'd that go?
I mean, it smelled like toasting pine nuts, and then it smelled like burning pine nuts. I mean, having cooked with pine nuts, it kind of smelled like what I thought it would smell like. Like, I've toasted pine nuts in a pan before. I think he means pine resin. I'm pretty sure he meant pine resin. But that's what I mean. Like, translating plant and animal names is not as straightforward as you might think. So, like, that's why, like, again, in the Incense book, I try to always give Latin names. And similarly, like, when I translate ancient magic, I try and explain. But it's not even that. The same plant, totally unrecognizable. So, like, here's an extreme example. There's a recipe for a holy incense in Torah called Keteret. And it includes an ingredient called cannabosem, which I've noticed that Christian translations pretend they don't know what plant that is, but spoiler, it is 100% definitely cannabis. But, like, I mean, first of all, cannabosem is obviously cannabis, but also every altar we dig up in ancient Israel is coated in fucking hash resin. Also, it produces visions. Like, it's definitely cannabis. I think it's absurd. Like, I didn't even know Christians pretended not to know what that plant was until I started reading some Christian Bible translations. But they'll be like this footnote, like, we have no idea. Oh, I'm like, yeah, okay. But,
Is this oregano?
right? Like, modern marijuana is so far away from, like, ancient wild cannabis plants.
Yeah.
That, like, you have to adjust the proportions. Remember I said I have a friend who's a professor of botanical medicine? So, she says that the singular place to be in plant genetics is in marijuana. Reading, like, that's, like, if you're a hotshot plant geneticist, that's what you do, is make new marijuana. And that, like, even in the last 50 years, marijuana is, like, 30 times stronger than it used to be. So, like, and other plants, too. Like modern domesticated, not just rice, but like regular agricultural products. Like our oregano is also 1,000,000 times better than ancient oregano was.
Oh, yeah,
so like even when
yeah.
you can identify the species, like we humans have dramatically altered that species. And so like you have to reconstruct these recipes with that in mind. Like it's a really cool, I'm such a nerd. So there's this whole like plant reconstructing ancient recipes is like harder than you would think because even when you can identify the plant isn't the same anymore.
Yeah.
Right. So crazy.
Well, hey, this has been an amazing conversation. I'm really enjoying all of this. I feel like
hope anybody's still listening. You and I are having fun, but I feel like when we listen to it later, I'm going to be like, that was just
no. Everybody's going to love this. This is great. I mean, I came into the conversation thinking we were only going to be talking about the pentacles, and we've gone off into so many amazing topics. I've really loved it, but we've come to a point where we have to like wrap up the conversation. What I really want to do at this point is talk again about your classes and where people can find you online and that kind of stuff. So it's like witchlessons.com. But tell everybody again about your upcoming classes that are the new session of which is starting.
New semesters of live classes start. The semester starts at Halloween. I think the first lessons are like the next week, maybe. Because Halloween weekend, I'm going to be in Cromwell, Connecticut at the Changing Times, Changing Worlds convention.
Are you going to be chopping off the head of a king or something? Is it that kind of Cromwell or a different one?
Sadly. Well, I don't know. I've never been there, but I used to live in New Haven, Connecticut, so I'm going to guess no
decapitations.
Any kings.
All right. Well,
But if I meet a king, I will do my best to behead him.
Okay, excellent. I'm looking forward to hearing about that in the newspapers.
I am doing a ritual, a Hecate ignition of witch fire ritual, so I will ignite your witch fire if you come to ritual.
All right.
I am teaching Sefer HaOtot, that Hebrew book of pentacles, and definitely a third class that at this exact moment I do not remember what it is, but I'm sure it's on their website, which is ctcw.net. That's a great convention. I encourage people to come.
All right.
New classes.
I'll put a link in the show notes.
Yeah,
yes.
New live classes. Introduction to Witchcraft, 13 lessons in the practice of magic. Designed for beginners, but also really good for more advanced people who either feel like maybe they're like lacking some fundamental skills, or just maybe feel like you're in a little bit of a rut and want like to see some new stuff from a new point of view, and just want somebody to like, make you do your homework. Like, we all get in those places where you're like a little stagnant and you maybe need a little push to get things done.
I totally have been in those places.
I mean, I will encourage you to do your homework, but I will also encourage you to get a study buddy who like you can do it with, right? So it's a really active class group. And then the other course is the Planetary Pentacles of Solomon Magician King, which is the companion to the Pentacle book we've been talking about. This year, you will get to see a lot of the Sefer HaOtot material in the course of those lessons. Again, it's 12 lessons. It's basically everything that's in the book plus 2 additional lessons that are not in the book at all, which are about sort of like creating your own pentacles. Like, just like I was talking about recipes, like by the time you've mastered these 44 recipes, like you know enough to start making your own. So we learned that for a while. Then, if you pass the final exam, you get an invitation to the Compact of Solomon, which is an invitation-only Solomonic magical order.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Now I want to take the class.
Please do. Witchlessons.com.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
This has been another episode of the Arnemancy Podcast. Thank you for joining me. I have been your host, Reverend Eric. You can find Arnemancy online at arnemancy.com, and you can subscribe to this podcast anywhere podcasts are found. If you like what you hear, please consider supporting the Arnemancy Project for as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/arnemancy.
This is Vanessa Urena, and I'm really excited to announce my new store, Sword and Scythe, where I will be offering magical art, materia, and services beneath Mars and Saturn. You can visit the store at swordandscythe.com and be sure to sign up for the email list to receive early access to new releases.